You can't see my eyes yet, and we're just gonna have to deal with that. Hi everyone, my name is Charlie, and I've only just woke up. It's about 9:15 on a Wednesday morning, and I had a rather awful night's sleep, which has just ended with me being chased. Well, not even chased, going through a dreamlike version of what Dream Charlie believed to be Buckingham Palace, only to discover a room full of guards with swords prepared to kill me. So I ran off, pulled a book, and this book opened out into this winding corridor of different sliding doors, all constructed from books, before I eventually made it back to a room and had apparently completed a quest. So naturally, I now want to include that in a book somewhere. I then attended the funeral of someone with the same name as me, and they had a hoedown. So I woke up to a country song that I can't really remember, and also the dog barking because we only got up because my dad got home. Anyway, yesterday I planned on doing a day of reading, and I didn't do it because other things got in the way. But today, I'm tired. My bones is aching. It's raining, and I can't think of anything better to do. Although I think I do have to go downstairs and do some washing up, but whatever. If I can sequester myself away in my bedroom for the majority of the day, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to be reading Summerwater by Sarah Moss. I've got about 100 pages left. This is a book I was wary about because of having read Ghost Wall, and I'd heard that this was related to that in some way. There's been one moment of tension in here that was similar to that. I'm finding it fast moving, as with the previous book I read by the author, but also a bit humorous, and in the way that she's managed to capture certain thoughts by people, which it can be a bit intense as well, being in somebody's head for that longer period of time. And the author does have to rely sometimes on some cliches, and I don't know what I'm going to read after that. Yesterday it was all going to be about the women's prize and reading more books from there, but I feel just today like having a palate cleanser and just focusing on some short books. So even the books of Jacob, which I wanted to finish by the end of this month and have nearly 340 something pages left, I can't remember now, will have to fall by the wayside until tonight at least. But for now, I'm going to go downstairs and have the cup of tea that my dad made me. We're now 3 hours in, and I haven't read anything yet today. The only person that has spent any time in my bed so far is Sally, who I've just come upstairs to discover. Well, I thought she was sleeping, but she's just resting. Anyway, I've consumed 2 cups of tea, and I've consumed 1.5 pints of iced coffee, which isn't really iced coffee. Basically, because I saw it on a video, I realised when I make a pot of coffee and I have some left over, I can refrigerate it. Because I like a cold coffee. I don't know why I didn't think I can just refrigerate it before, actually, rather than waiting around, heating up and ice and all that. Common sense did not prevail originally when it came to this, but consumed 1.5 pints of this. I'm now mildly awake, and I did this because there were 2 videos I wanted to watch. I had to email the writers group to tell them what we were doing this week. I had to send an email for my father with regards to some land that we're trying to rent, although everyone wants this land. Basically, my dad has now lost a considerable amount of land due to the fact that some landlords have decided to sell it or hand it over to family members. And so we're trying to pull any resources together to try and get some land so that my father can continue to farm from February next year. There was a whole thing on Countryfile about farmland recently, about how certain companies down south are buying it up to plant trees, and then they sell these the carbon somehow off to big companies, so these big companies can say that they're actually getting more carbon neutral, that sort of thing. And this guy was trying to defend himself on Countryfile, but to me it was a bit indefensible. But then farming is always a difficult thing in any case, so hopefully we can get some of this land. It's only available to rent, but what have you. My first sip of tea this morning I ended up choking on, so if you can see any tea stains, I apologise, because it went all over me and I considered getting changed, but since doing that, washing up and all that, all the water has dried and I am too lazy to bother getting changed, so this will have to do today. Hopefully I actually get some reading done within the next 6 hours before I have an Italian conversation. I'm beginning to wonder whether a day of reading is just a pipe dream for me, because that is not what today has been. It's not even been a languid day. It's not been one of those nice, relaxing days in which I can just settle back and get reading done. However, I have finished reading Summerwater by Sarah Moss, and this is just an hour of the reading that I got done today, and it didn't happen until 3 o'clock, which makes me very sad indeed. So I like this, but it didn't hit me as hard as Ghost Wall, which is probably a good thing. This is a short piece and follows a lot of different people over one day, and they're all staying in these lodges. It's a Scottish cabin park. It's pouring it down with rain, and we're going into the heads of various people who are staying there. And we're discussing their lives outside of this cabin park and seeing how they deal with the rain and the situation that they're in. In the beginning, the author focused on some very cliched ideas about people in order to get some comedy across and entered into their heads. Overall, we're seeing them look into each other's lives as well. There is mention of this Bulgarian, Ukrainian, Eastern European woman. Her daughter has stones thrown at her by the children of one family in here, and there's a phrase used by certain xenophobic people in here after Britain seceded from the European Union, in which they had this belief that anybody who wasn't British, who wasn't English, would be forced to leave England. Well, Britain in this case. And there's that tension there. With this tension comes the divide between Scotland and England as well, and whilst Sarah Moss doesn't examine that, this also creates some tensions. However, these people don't really communicate with one another, and it's just a flash into their lives and then we're out again. It was somewhat interesting to spend a day with these people, as in the day of this book, but every story was really a story that we'd seen before, and every character was a character we'd seen before. I kind of just disagree with every single one of these blurbs on the cover. I liked it, and I found humour in it sometimes, and I appreciated how Moss had captured characters, but all the situations felt like situations we've seen before, or things that have been done to death. I don't feel like I've wasted my time, but I didn't really get anything from the reading of this book. I needed more, basically. That's it. I needed more from this book. The interludes between the chapters also did nothing for me, because whilst they were good and there was some strong writing in there, offset against everything else going on, there was one portion of the tale is told from the perspective of a young child, and whilst it's in third person, we spend so much time in the character's head that there were certain words that this child was using that just didn't make sense for the child, and I think that should have been caught in editing. So yeah, no. Good book, but by no means brilliant, fantastic, and will be getting returned to the charity shop. However, before I have my Italian conversation this evening, I want to go on and read another book set in Scotland, and that is The Devil's Footprints by John Burnside. I haven't read anything by John Burnside before, but as I was reading that, I thought, well, the association's there. I've never been to Scotland, but two of my brothers are currently there. One works there on a farm estate, and the other's gone to help during lambing. But whilst I'm not with them, we can read about the devil passing through a small Scottish fishing town. And we might not finish this today, but we're going to have a good crack at it. I have an hour and a half to read before I have an Italian conversation for an hour, then make tea, have tea, and then spend the last 2 hours of the day reading. And then I'll probably come to you and put an end to things in the morning. In the meantime, I thought I'd just show you this little dog. Sally wants to act like she's being neglected right now because she's in bed and someone isn't fussing over her. Isn't that right, Sal? After I spoke to you yesterday, I read a few pages of The Devil's Footprints by John Burnside before I had my Italian conversation with the lady who comes into my shop. And it was a complete disaster on my part. And I ended up feeling, I said on Instagram, rather disenchanted, but it was the Leggenda di Romolo e Remo. And when she brought this to me on Saturday, I recognised straight away it was going to be Romulus and Remus, which is a story that I know. However, one thing that I hadn't banked on, which is something that's come up a few times when we've been discussing these Italian passages, is how ancient Greek names get changed in Italian. There were a lot more words this week that I didn't properly know, and then there were words that I did know, but it just, for the first time I felt rushed last night, and I felt like I didn't properly know how to figure out what was being said, so I was disappointed in myself. And considering I'm not going to be talking to her for a while because of other obligations that I have, I'm a bit disheartened. That's the word, disheartened. Either way, I have read the first 75 pages of The Devil's Footprints by John Burnside. I'm actually quite enjoying it. I don't know what the style is reminiscent of, but so far we're hearing about our protagonist, Michael, and he's going in the modern... in the time that the book starts, Michael has just discovered that Moira, this woman he knows from the past, believed her husband to be the devil, so killed herself and their two sons, but left her elder daughter to go free. Michael is going back and discussing something that happened in his childhood, and I think we're going to get more tales of what went on in this village in which he lives. It's only a relatively short book, but even in just these 75 pages, it's been packed full of this nostalgia for youth. But it's a recognition that the behaviours of the people then might not be what he thought they were at the time, and they might have been meant differently, and he's recognising that as he's older. But these first 75 pages mostly have dealt with him telling the story of his school bully. I think his childhood is taking place in the late 70s, early 80s. And there are things in here that I am being reminded of having seen when I was at school from these television children's drama things that they used to show us. So there was one about stealing the eggs of the peregrine falcon, and this school bully goes nesting, and there was a particularly gruesome scene involving some chicks, and I don't think that I'm ever going to get over the image of that. Last night I sat there and I read it, and oh, goodness gracious me. I don't know whether I have just got soft in my old age, but I did feel a bit of a twerp as I sat there just feeling really sad over this fictional chick that, you know, it didn't exist, but it was very violent moments that was used to emphasise the bully and his behaviours, and these were behaviours that, if you've experienced bullying, you've experienced that. And I was talking to Charlie Brooke again, and we were mentioning bullies in relation to Heaven by Mieko Kawakami, and how I've now got some reticence at reading that because of the mention of bullying. And in here, I did find myself reminded of my own school bullies. These are events that took place nearly 18, 19 years ago now. And I was never taken out to moors and having to, marshes, and having any sort of animalistic violence happen. Those 75 pages are used to create this very close-knit world where everybody's in each other's pockets and they know each other's business. They're used to create this element of tension, to try and build this mystery surrounding the death of Moira and her children. Although there's not been anything magical happening within the prose, it still feels like a bit of a magical book. I don't understand that, but language is great, characters are great. It feels so fully formed, and I feel quite invested in this one. When I set out to create this video, it was going to be the one day, and that was it. It was going to be all about a day of reading and doing nothing but that for the entirety of the day. That's not what I did. When I recorded the clip on Thursday, everything kept going awry, and I was enjoying The Devil's Footprints by John Burnside at the time. Now it's Sunday, I'm actually getting around to editing this video, and so I thought, who cares whether I didn't manage to get this day of reading done? Let's talk about The Devil's Footprints before we end this video, because I don't want to leave it forever, and also everyone's gone out of the house, so I've actually got some time before I'm next able to record. Anyway, I ended up not enjoying this book in the end, and that's a shame because I really did enjoy the first part of the book that I read. Admittedly, I was reading folklore into the book where folklore didn't exist because I got things mixed up. So there's this character called Tom, and there was some question as to whether he was the devil in the book, and I was getting the tale of Old Scratch mixed up as to who Tom was in that story. And then Malcolm, I believed to have been something in Scottish folklore to do with a devilish character, but I couldn't find it in the end. So I don't know whether I made that up in my head or where it came from, but I was wrong. After that first part, we then get a very long, bloated section, which is to do with the protagonist, Michael, the dissolution of his marriage. And there is some talk of the grief that he feels at the death of his parents. These things seemingly happen so far apart that it didn't make sense how it connected to the narrative. We can say that the dissolution of his marriage might have happened due to the grief he was feeling from the loss of his parents, but it didn't read that way. It didn't really make sense where it was coming from. And then it does say on the back, Michael's infatuation with Moira's teenage daughter takes him on a journey towards a defined fate, where he is forced to face his present and then finally his past. And for me, that is where you can tell that the person who was having to create a blurb for this book actually didn't know how to make this book sound good. It was a struggle, because basically we know that Michael is going to take this girl on a journey, because Michael questions in the beginning of this book whether Moira's daughter, Moira is the woman who's killed herself, he questions whether Moira's daughter could be his. And this goes back into the past and discovering, in the first 75 pages, discovering his connection to Moira and what he'd done in the past was intriguing and dark, and the way it was written was very, again, it was vivid. It was reminiscent of things that I had been through, and I don't know whether it was drawing on my own emotions that influenced the way that I felt about that particular passage, but there was also a sense of nostalgia there that I was enjoying. And even though it did go back and forth in time, it felt clearer than it did later on, and perhaps that was what the author was doing, trying to muddy the fissures between the past, the present and the future. As the reader, we are led to feel uncomfortable, and I don't have a problem with feeling uncomfortable in literature if it's going to go anywhere. And Michael begins to recognise the consequences of his actions, because to everybody else it's going to, because it's a small fishing town, it's going to look like there's more going on between him and Moira's daughter than there actually is. And he recognises that this disappearing with her might actually be seen as abduction. However, nothing seems to happen consequence-wise, and again, I am the reader, did not get the ending that I'd hoped for. I got an ending that felt as though it was rather Hollywood, and when I say that I mean that everything works out well in the end, and this felt like the story where this should not have happened, this should not have occurred. The protagonist is just so incredibly lucky that the entire tale ended up feeling unbelievable. Forgetting that as well, though, the actual prose became so difficult to comprehend and so boring. There was absolutely, in my mind, no reason that this book had to go on as long as it did. And that's awful to say when this book is only 217 pages, but I think we could have had a much shorter novella, and I actually think that the separation of this into parts didn't do the story justice. I think that it needed certain portions edited out. I don't know what though. I just felt like it had a good idea, but it's missed its mark. And also, this idea of the devil being at all present didn't make any sense either. I can't help but wonder whether the author came up with a title and then the story veered away from that, but he decided to try and bring it back, or whether it made sense to the author and to nobody else, because this whole devil's footprints situation is only mentioned in a bit of a prelude scene in an epilogue scene, and the whole mention of the devil has no bearing on the story at all, so I have absolutely no idea why it's referenced here. There could be some allegory for depression in here, but once again, I just don't think that this book was done incredibly well. So I think it missed the mark on in too many ways, and that disappointed me because I'd been really hopeful with the first 75 pages that I was onto a winner and might have a new favourite. And this is happening much more with fiction nowadays. I keep getting really thrilled by the start, and it's just not going well. Anyway, sorry to end on a sad note, but the two books that I read this week both turned out to be disappointments, and that's just something we're going to have to contend with going forward. Either way, what did you think? If you've read either Summerwater or The Devil's Footprints and would like to discuss them, please feel free to do so in the comments. Maybe you've read them both and have completely different opinions. I'm here to chat, and that's the place to do it. I hope that you got something out of this video, because until next time, that is all.